So, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantamania, the first film of Phase 5 of the MCU, is finally out, and I watched it. And here is my non-spoiler review. I'll just give a brief summary of what my feelings were regarding the film and what you should expect going into the film. So, I'll just start off by saying I was really looking forward to this film. This was supposed to be an Ant-Man film. Ant-Man is one of my favorite characters from the MCU. He is an everyday man who gets pulled into these wild adventures with the Avengers, and that has always been really fascinating for me. And I feel he's really underrated, especially his role in Endgame, which was really crucial. No one really talks about him, and I was looking forward to him being the one to face the big bad of the MCU going forward, Kang the Conqueror. And the fact that this was going to be the stepping stone for this character, who as people who have read the comics is one of the most powerful people in the Marvel universe. So the trailers set it up as a big Kang versus Ant-Man battle sort of film. Ant-Man suffering from the loss of time and the fact that he could not spend enough time with his daughter due to whatever happened in his life, and Kang drawing him in because of that. The trailers built on that, and it looked really interesting, and it was my most anticipated film of the year. And I have to say, I was really disappointed by the film. Now, I'll say this, it is not a bad film. It is good. But overall, I felt it was not what the trailers or the synopsis set up the film to be. So before I go into the negatives, talk about the positives. And the biggest positive here is Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror. Let's not kid ourselves here. We all went into this film simply to watch Kang the Conqueror. And Jonathan Majors lives up to the hype. Kang is a really good villain.
You're an Avenger. Have I killed you before?
I would say Kang didn't do much in the film, but the presence, the character has such a presence on screen that every time you see him, there's this danger, there's this sense of dread that comes. Jonathan Majors kills it in the role. I am looking forward to seeing this character reprise his role, especially with how the film leaves it off. I love what the film does with the character, with his character at the end, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of Jonathan Majors in the MCU. And then Paul Rudd, as always, is really good in the role of Ant-Man. He brings the charm, he brings the likability like he always does. But in this film, we get to see a different side to Scott. We get to see the emotional side of him, the father side of him, more than in the previous films. I would say this is the darkest film in the Ant-Man trilogy. That does not mean there is no humor in the film. On the contrary, there's a lot of humor sprinkled throughout the film. I'll come back to this point later on in the video. Next, we have to talk about Michelle Pfeiffer as Janet Van Dyne. And I was surprised with how much screen time and development her character got in the film. I would say she's one of the main characters alongside Kang and Ant-Man. She basically the main one of the main characters. We get to see more of her backstory, her life in the quantum realm before she was pulled out of it of by her family and Scott. And we get to know her history with Kang, her trauma. Those are the interesting parts of the film. It kept me hooked. And lastly, we have to talk about the visuals. The visuals in this film were really good, except for when they weren't. There are a couple of pieces here and there where the visuals fall short. I'll speak about that in a minute when I speak about the negatives. But I don't have any other problems with the visuals. Visuals are really, really good, especially in the quantum realm and the design of the various characters inside the quantum realm. Okay, so unfortunately, this is where the positives end for me. Moving on to the negatives. The biggest flaw of this film is that the pacing is not right. I will kid you not. When I was watching the first half of the film, I was actually bored. Nothing happens for the first chunk of the film. Let me rephrase that properly. Nothing important or memorable happens in the first half of the first chunk of the film. The film just starts, and then you get a little bit of the normal world things, and then you are sucked into the quantum realm, and the characters are sucked into the quantum realm, and the film slows down. There's like 40 minutes of the film where the characters are just going around and speaking to other characters, and nothing memorable is happening on screen. I was bored. And when you're watching a Marvel film, the last thing that you want to happen is get bored. And I was bored by most of the film. The next negative I have to talk about here is the tone. The tone is all over the place. It's extremely inconsistent. For instance, at one point, the characters are standing in front of Kang, who is this serious villain, and the next scene, there's a character in the film making jokes about holes, and there is a lot of inconsistent humor tonality in the film, and that brings it down. And I have to say that goes hand in hand with the story, which was not what I expected it to be. The story tries to be complex, but it's really, really simple. It was like the film, the plot was this small, and they tried to drag it out as much as they could. From the trailers, it would look as if Kang is this big presence in the film and he does a lot of stuff and all. But that is not what happens. He looms over in the background. The characters are all dreading him and everything. But he does not get to do a lot in the film. For most of the scenes, he's just standing around and looking at stuff or talking to people. And while Jonathan Majors is a good actor and he holds the screen in those scenes, I wanted to see Kang do more stuff and I was really disappointed. And now let's talk about Modok. This is not a spoiler because he was shown in the marketing. So this is not a spoiler that Modok is in the film. But Modok is a character that I have always felt would never translate well on the screen. And I unfortunately stand by that notion. They tried to do Modok and it looked really, really bad. The visuals for Modok were bad. They basically looked like they tried to fit the actor's face into this small helmet and they squished down the actor's face instead of using better visuals, and it looks really, really bad. I was actually being pulled out of the film with how bad the visuals were for Modok. The character in itself is funny, but he does not fit the tone of that the film is trying to go for. You have Kang as this menacing, no nonsense bad guy, and then beside him you have Modok. They do not work together. There are scenes where the two characters are together, and it looks like these are two different characters from two different movies. Let me say that Hank and Wasp get the short end of the stick in this film. They hardly get to do anything until the climax. This is basically Scott, Kang, Janet, and Cassie running the show. And speaking of Cassie, while I enjoyed her character, they could have given us a little more of her arc, a little more of Cassie. I wouldn't have minded. I liked how the character was done in the film, but it felt a little like they tried to force the character to us. It didn't feel quite so smooth at times. And while I have no problems with her character, they could have done lots more. This film could have been way better than it is. And unfortunately, I would have to say this is a very weak start to Phase 5. And I'm really disappointed with this film. It was one of my most anticipated films of the year. Probably the most anticipated one, probably the one film I was looking forward to the most this year. And it let me down really, really bad. So, speaking of the post credit scenes, there are two post credit scenes in the film. And I liked those post credit scenes. The first one is something that I really, really wanted to see going into this film, and I'm glad they did that. And the second one is a setup for a future MCU project, and I liked both of the post credit scenes. So, in summation, I would say while Jonathan Majors does a great job as Kang, and I'm looking forward to him coming back in future projects, the rest of the film was all over the place with the tone, the story, and the characters, and it could have been way, way better if they had just done the pacing right. So I would give it a strong 6 out of 10. I was disappointed with the film, but you can definitely try it out. Maybe you might like it more than I did. It's definitely not as bad as the reviews are saying, but keep in mind it is not what you expect it to be. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, do like, share, and subscribe, and comment down below if you have watched the film. What were your thoughts about it? Whether you agree with my review, whether you disagree, and do tell me what your most anticipated upcoming MCU project is. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.